Welcome to A State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Stuart Ray, but also by photographer Richard Davis. Welcome to Scotland, first and foremost. I know you're fond of the country, Richard.
I love Scotland, but thank you very much for inviting me up here.
Where have you travelled from?
Lancaster.
Right. We're going to be talking about your career. 40 years?
40.
Taking photographs.
That's making me feel too old already, that, Paul. Thank you for that.
But it's all about, this studio is all about culture, football, music, fashion.
Yeah.
And, looking at the striking images that you've captured over that period, Stuart says to me, this photographer fits what we're all about. And we've seen some of your photographs and we want to walk through your journey. Let's go right back to the kind of early days and, the origins of your love of taking photographs, growing up in Birmingham, first of all.
Yeah, I suppose, it is about 1982, 83, really. Like I said, I left school 1982 and no real idea of what I was going to do, and it was my mum, bless her, who said, why don't you go to a night school and do a night class? And of course I said, well, what on? And she said, well, actually, you like photography, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, I don't mind, Well, there's a photography class here, go along. So she gave me a bit of a kick up backside, and God bless her, thank you for doing that, because really straight away I instantly fell in love with the photographic process, especially in terms of the dark room, that first moment of going into a dark room and seeing that image magically appear. It's I've never lost that enthusiasm, really.
Is that still special for you?
Oh, it's still special. I mean, it's the darkness, the red light, and a bit of decent music playing as well. There's just no better way to spend, say, 6-7 hours, to be honest.
You know what I like about it? Everything has to be instant these days, Richard, doesn't it? Whereas there's a bit of patience involved with that. Yeah.
I mean, what's harder, I admit, obviously I photograph on digital as well as film these days. If I've got the time, then I will set my darkroom up. But as you say, in this day and age, you don't always have the time. But when I can fit it in, it's still really wonderful,
Stuart, you introduced me to the work of Richard. What drew you to the photographs that we're going to be looking at today?
Well, like you said earlier, music, football, culture is a big part of what we do. It's what brings us to work every morning. Mm-hmm. So we've seen the music side, Bez, which we'll come on to later, Stone Roses, that Manchester scene, but there was so much more. There was football, there was comedy, so you were capturing everything. And then, like you said, not everybody was doing that. Everybody was focusing on a sole subject.
I think what's great is, as soon as I walked into your studio, it was like being back at home. I was looking around, all the stuff up on your walls, the football kits, the bikes, the scooters, the clothing, the books. It's exactly the type of thing I love myself, and really, yes, I am known as a photographer, but there's many other interests I have, and really, what was as important as the photography for me early on was film. And still to this day, I put film as quite a priority in my life. Obviously, as is football, as is music, which is what we all love. And I put that together, and we're talking culture, aren't we? Which is what the British do really well. I think we've always done well. And though I am, seen as mainly a photographer these days, there's so much more going on in my life than just a camera. But instantly, I love what you do, from what I saw online, but instantly, as soon as I came in this studio, I knew this is the right environment for me to be in.
Brilliant. It's a meeting of minds.
It is a meeting of minds.
Absolutely. Richard, just quickly, you spoke about other interests. You mentioned us to before that you were in a lot of bands in Birmingham. Yeah,
so there's obviously there's a Birmingham period of my life when I left school, and up to about 22, when really music was to the fore, really, probably more so than photography. And I spent a number of years being in various Birmingham bands, which was a difficult thing to do at that time, because Birmingham was quite still really a heavy rock city, which didn't go down well with me and my mates, really. We were all into kind of like punk and post-punk and scratchy guitars. And that's why I was saying to you earlier about how I loved the whole music scenes in Glasgow and Manchester and Liverpool. And really Birmingham didn't fit into that. So we weren't too successful, which in hindsight I'm glad about, because I might not have really took a lot of my focus wouldn't have gone on photography if I'd been reasonably successul.
Yeah.
But having said that, I remember 1982, 83, 84, some great moments around Birmingham, going to gigs, and there was some really nice bands around Birmingham at that time in the Midlands area that were quite odd, like the Nightingales and the Au Pairs and the Very Things and the Cravats and also the Trees and Eyeless in Gaza, and a band called the Dancing Did. And they were all peculiar bands. You couldn't pigeonhole them. And so, I don't want to dismiss Birmingham as a purely Judas Priest, Black Sabbath only city, because there were, So, yeah, as I said, music and film really were the two big things to start with for me. And that was like opening a door, wasn't it, into culture and how you looked and fashion, and inevitably photography followed from that, really.
The mindset of the punks, is that still with you to this day?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, it's a state of mind.
Lovely.
Yeah, punk always was a state of mind, wasn't it? And it wasn't about a uniform or a leather jacket or a Mohican. As we all know, the original bands didn't look like that at all, did they? I mean, so punk really is an attitude. And without a doubt, I think if you had that positive attitude around that time, you're never going to lose that,
You spoke earlier about your schooling. When you look back, the disappointment you feel in the lack of quality schooling.
I think that for my generation, we were unfortunate, really, because we were before the huge changes that came with technology and the schooling system in later years. I mean, we were, if you didn't pass that 11 plus and you went to state school, you were pretty much neglected, really. I remember my teachers really, they didn't seem to motivate you at all, which is a shame, really. I mean, I often sometimes look back and think I was robbed of a decent school past, really. But one thing I just remembered, Mike Skinner, went to the same school as Mike Skinner from the Streets.
Brilliant.
Obviously, I was a lot older than Mike, so I didn't know Mike at the time, but that's my claim to fame over the years. I went to the same school as Mike Skinner.
Brilliant. You mentioned film a few times as well, so what are your kind of like influences there?
They were my main influences for my early photography work, really. I didn't really know a lot of photographers apart from the mainstream, David Bailey and Don McCullen. So mainly I was taking a lot of inspiration from film, certain films like Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders, which was a black and white film shot in Berlin. Another really good black and white film was Down by Law by Jim Jarmusch, which came out in the mid-80s. So they were really what I was looking at, rather than... it was only when I moved to Manchester in 1988 when I started studying a lot more photographers and suddenly realised what a rich history photography has, and how important it was really to work out who did what and when and how. And again, that was quite a crucial moment, really. The one photographer who I started studying was a guy called Robert Capa. And he was famous really for shooting the Spanish Civil War. But I remember going to the library at Manchester Polytechnic. It's a fantastic library full of books. And I realised, my God, this guy, Robert Capa, this photo I saw of him, he looked far cooler than any musician I knew. And that was like... And another one, Lee Miller as well, the photographer Lee Miller. These look like real maverick people and real individuals. And all of a sudden, I guess they contributed to me putting down my guitar and picking up my camera and really focusing on photography. And really then, from September 88, I never ever played in a music band again. And I never did any, even though I was hanging around a lot with musicians still. That was it then. It was a big moment for me. And it was just coincided with that move into the city of Manchester, really. It was like a new phase in my life, and I'm so grateful now when I look back, because it really concentrated the mind, really, and that was the start of things for me in terms of photography. So always got a special place in my heart, really, for Robert Capa.
When you look at Capa on the right side of politics as well,
yeah,
and the way that he was capturing that.
As I said, the Spanish Civil War. I've always been so anti-war, and I've often joked over the years, if ever I was going to go to war, it would have been the Spanish Civil War.
Fight Franco.
Fight the fascists.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that's came into your work when you look at the decrepit state of the UK under Thatcher. And the Tories.
Yeah, well, the 80s, weren't they? What a fascinating time the 80s were. Going back to what happened for me in Birmingham was, obviously I was on the dole for a while and had various YTS schemes. But it wasn't really until I got involved with a centre for the unemployed, which was in Sparkbrook in Birmingham, which was a really Irish and Asian working class area. And they were like a citizens advice bureau. And they kind of like, that gave me an education, really. That really opened my eyes up to issues and social issues and housing and I guess in terms politics. And they had a dark room at this centre. And they let me use it, Obviously, I was on the dole. I didn't have a lot of money, and I owe so much to the people who ran that centre. And they used to send me out. They used to give me a camera with a film, and they'd send me out for a day and say, "Don't come back until you've shot all that film. But look at your surroundings. Look at the surroundings and photograph them." And then spend the next couple of days printing them, and then come and show us what you've done. That is what school should be like, So that not only did it give me a really good interest in photography and an understanding of what photography could do in terms of social issues and helping people, but it also It also got me aware of politics, really, and also how can we help people as well who are in need, really. Yeah. And I remember during that time, the miners' strike was a big thing in the 80s under Thatcher, and there were so many good photos that come out of that dispute. And one of my favourite images of the time was obviously that I got a photograph by John Harris, who a photograph of a policeman truncheon with a truncheon hitting a woman photographer. Powerful image. That made a big impression on me. So that really was my education, and it was at the guys who run the Centre for the Unemployed were the ones who got me to move to Manchester to apply for the course at Manchester Poly, which obviously I would never have done myself if I hadn't have, had someone push me and you can do it. So I owe them a lot, That's another big moment for me, really, going to the Birmingham Trades Council, Centre for the Unemployed.
So talking about that and talking about the move to Manchester, you were studying at Manchester Polytechnic.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a bit about how you got into that, the interview you had to do?
Yeah. Well, I believe it or not, I was 22 at the time, and I qualified as a mature student, which means I didn't need a qualification. Not sure whether they still do that these days. I don't know. Possibly not the way things are run these days. So I got in that way, and it was a right time for me because I think I was so grateful for what I'd had in the last couple of years in terms of re-educating myself in terms of politics and in terms of my photography, and to have that opportunity to move city, but not just any city. I mean, this was Manchester, and I, being a big music fan, I grew up obviously liking most of the Manchester bands, The Fall, Magazine, Joy Division, Buzzcocks. They were all Manchester based, and obviously my favourite record label obviously was Factory. Now, bizarrely, Factory obviously has its origins in Hume, which we'll come on to at some point in the talk. Hume, because Hume played and still plays a big role in my life, which is a district in Manchester. So another one of the big photos that really influenced me when I was taking up photography in the mid-80s was a photo of Joy Division, actually, on a snowy, barren, landscaped bridge in Hume, which photographer Kevin Cummins took in 1979. And it wasn't just your normal band photo. It's not like four blokes up against a wall in a line. I mean, we're talking here about you could not see the faces of the band. They were so far away in the distance on this bridge, but the environment and the atmosphere this photo created was so important for what we came to know as Manchester and Factory, and the aesthetic that the Factory bands went on to produce. And really, I think Hume played a massive part in that, because Hume was this huge housing estate on the edge of the city centre, which was really like brutalist architecture and very grey and concrete and I suppose East European in appearance. And actually, most of my photographs tended to were going that way because of, just diverting slightly, Birmingham Spaghetti Junction was one of my favourite places to photograph in Birmingham. And that was very much a concreted, grey underworld of canals and paths and scrap car yards and businesses, all underneath this huge monstrosity that was Spaghetti Junction. So when I saw those photos of Hume early on, the Joy Division ones, it did something up here. And it was logged in, and I think it was only when I moved to Manchester in '88, I put two and two together and realised what an important place Hume was. Now, bizarrely, the first day I was at Manchester Poly, the lecturers got us all together and said, "Don't go into Hume." Now, most of the people on the course were probably 18 and 19-year-olds. I had lived in flats in Birmingham, in Lascelles, in Handsworth, and I knew, I couldn't understand, well, what was wrong with Hume. So then they were saying, well, you know, it's a safety issue, don't go over there. So, of course, next day, I went over to Hume.
Don't push the red button.
And, but I always joke about that. But now, believe it or not now, in the present day, half of Hume is owned by Manchester University, which used to be the old Polytechnic. So that's the joke now, isn't it? Whereas before, in the past, when we had the old estate, before it was all knocked down, they didn't want you to go anywhere near the place.
When you went, what was your observations of that place?
I thought straight away, this would be a really great place to photograph in. Where's my camera? What happened was I went to a gig on the first Friday night in Manchester at a place called the Swinging Sporran Pub, which is in the city centre of Manchester. Every person who I met that night lived in Hume. Everyone. Mm-hmm. And a person who I met that night was introduced me to a manager of a band. And obviously, most of the music bands in Manchester lived in Hume or had lived in Hume or moved through the area or had a connection to the area. And you learnt that pretty quickly. And you could understand why. You know, most of the flats were squatted. It was cheap living, and it was walking distance to the centre where all the venues and nightclubs were. So it's a very convenient place to live, and full of young people. So I met on the following week. I met one of the bands in one of the pubs in Hume, and I sort of walked in, and next thing I know, there's about another 2 or 3 bands in the pub, and they all want photographers. As soon as the word got out, I had a camera. I was in demand, mm-hmm. And very quickly, I had this 2 lives now. I had the student, my course, but I also instantly was involved in the Manchester Hume scene within 10 days of arriving in the city. So it was exactly what I wanted and needed because, you know, like I said, I felt lucky I was in Manchester. I had that opportunity to go to the Poly. And I had this huge desire not to waste my time. And so began like a 3 or 4 years of madness, really, where I didn't get a lot of sleep and I had so much going on, and I just loved every minute of it.
You know? You're talking about human squatters and the various different people who were residing there. What kind of community did it have? Well,
it was a real mixture of. Straight away you walked in the place, you realised it wasn't your normal neighbourhood. Mm-hmm. There were no families, so. This estate, I think, was built in the early 70s, and very early on, there was an incident where a child unfortunately died, and the council quickly realised what had happened and what had gone on, and moved all the families out. Obviously, then they were left with this huge area, one of the biggest in Europe, council estate. What were they going to do with it? So, for a number of years, probably until about 94, I think it was, the whole estate became left to its own devices. And it was mostly young people, it was mostly students, it was mostly dropouts, it was mostly the punks, the ravers, drug dealers. It was anyone, I suppose, outside of mainstream society, all of a sudden had a haven. Mm-hmm. And I've often joked in the past in other interviews where I've felt it was like Glastonbury, but instead of tents, we were in concrete blocks. That was the kind of community you had. But also, let me make it clear as well, there's certainly a downside to Hume. And I always thought in my head there was like a series of unwritten rules, and if you abided by them, you'd be all right. Now, you knew if you were in trouble in Hume, the police wouldn't come. You were on your own. And if you knew that and accepted that, life was great. But for me personally, obviously, I set up a darkroom and a studio there. And I didn't want too many people knowing that. And I didn't walk around with a camera around my neck either. So I used to have this like denim bag which I put my camera in, which you'd never know there was a camera in there. And thankfully, of all that time, I never had my camera nicked, or I never really had any grief in terms of people breaking into to my flat or anything. And I guess I was quite lucky in that sense. I had a few dodgy incidents over the years, like flat got flooded 3 times and had a knife pulled on me a couple of times. But apart from that, I didn't actually lose any of my photo equipment, because really, ultimately, I didn't have a lot of possessions. But I had my camera, and I'd have been gutted if I'd lost my camera. That would have been my life over,
You spoke a lot about the freedom. And the fact that the police didn't come. Yeah. How important do you think having that freedom was for like yourself?
Massively, but also for anybody, the music bands as well, especially, I think, and the comedy scene. It's worth noting really that Manchester, that's what I've said again with the book that I've recently had out on Manchester. It wasn't just about music. Mm-hmm. It was a whole thing across the arts and the comedy scene. Somebody needs to document this properly, because it was special and it was highly unusual, the talent that was in that city at the time, and they've all gone on to massive things. Steve Coogan and Caroline Aherne and Henry Normal and Lem Sissay and John Thompson, Dave Gorman, John Ronson. These were all people that, I guess, the freedom we had in those times. Now, we had I think young people had more freedom anyway in the late 80s, but Hume, it was amplified even more. What was good with that environment in Hume was you had space to do your own thing. And for me personally, I took a lot of inspiration from seeing what others were doing as well, and that kind of motivated you as well. If you saw Steve Coogan, for example, I did all of his early photos. I did a lot of his photos for his live shows, the projections he first used to do. So I hung around with Steve a lot, and it kind of like rubs off on you if you see what other people are doing, because I think Steve's younger than me, actually. I'm actually older than Steve, so Steve was slightly younger than me when I knew him. And that kind of... It wasn't just Steve, so many other people that I photographed and got to know and admired and watched what their careers developing. It really inspired you to get up early in the mornings and do things for yourself, rather than lie in or I'll do it tomorrow. I think that was a sense I've remembered a lot from those days, was how positive it all was, and how a scene does create a scene. And I've never experienced it since, actually. I've tried my hardest.
Do you think people were fearless?
Yes, I do. There wasn't a fear of failure. I think especially with a lot of, like, Caroline Aherne with her early characters, and Steve as well with his ideas. In some ways, if one character didn't quite work as well as the next, it didn't matter. You learned. And it's the same with me, I guess, with photographs. The early photographs I took in Birmingham, I would say probably 50% of it were rubbish. But you learn. And in fact, you learn by mistakes, don't you? In fact, sometimes it's bloody good to make mistakes, because as long as you're aware of what you've done wrong, you can put it right. So I think that's a good thing, really. But yeah, there was definitely no fear of failure, because I don't think people were that judgmental either.
Yeah. You were
know?
given that freedom to
We were, yeah.
express yourself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. See, when you look at Steve Coogan, the global success that he's had, when you look
Incredible.
at the movies he's been in,
Yeah.
did you see that early doors?
He was very, very, very funny. And I kind of like, when I knew him, he was doing the voiceovers on Spitting Image.
Right.
So I knew he was making inroads. Obviously, Alan Partridge wasn't around then. And I tell you the other joke, I photographed Duncan Disorderly, who was Paul Calf. I was gutted I never photographed Pauline Calf, which Steve later developed, because I thought, what a character she was. I think it stood out. Steve was pretty driven.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the talent to go with it. But also, I mean, he made you laugh, you know. I can remember a lot of the times whenever I was photographing him, he was obviously always in character. A bit like Frank Sidebottom used to do as well. If you ever met Frank and photographed with Frank, he was Frank. He wasn't Chris Seavey. So he was Frank all the time. And even there was times I phoned him up, Chris Seavey, and he'd say, hang on a minute, I'll go and get Frank. And he'd go away from the phone and he'd come back and it would be little Frank's voice. But I love that. I think all those characters, they were like unique people, really, weren't they?
Unique time.
You know? Yeah.
A unique time.
Yeah.
You know, when people think of Manchester, I love the music, of course, and it's great to talk about the other forms of art, particularly the comedy. And there are some visuals, so you think of Happy Mondays, you think of the Stone Roses. When did you see that type of band coming through? When did you realise, you know, the Hacienda was going to be the place to be?
I think do you remember? I mean, it was bubbling a lot in Manchester because a lot of the magazines and a lot of the Manchester Evening News and they were really pro-supportive and they were getting big gigs anyway. But I think for the rest of the country, do you remember there was a Top of the Pops, I think, when both the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays were on, and it was a turning point. And I know you noticed in Manchester, all of a sudden, you had all these people from London coming up and signing anybody with a Manchester postcode. So I think you noticed a lot of the gigs, 89, it was getting very popular in Manchester. But I think mainstream across the country, it was more like 1990, wasn't it, really? But it was electric, really, the city. You felt momentum, and what I really liked was there was always something going on, and I guess I had it lucky in the sense because of doing photography and having a sort of like interest in all kinds of things that were going on. Like I said, you know, the writers, the poets, the comedians, as well as the music. I was going out every night of the week. There was always something on. Always, every night of the week, even on like Sunday nights and Monday nights, and it was full on. There was always something happening in that city, and there were also a lot of there were also some great bands that didn't make it that should have done. I mean, it's worth pointing out there were bands like the Ruthless Rap Assassins. What a band they were, but they didn't kind of like fit the media profile of what Manchester, I guess, was. Same with World of Twist, the band World of Twist and Interstellar. Now them two were probably my favourite Manchester bands, believe it or not, and they came out round about the end of 1990, I think. Yet they just didn't make it. What a shame! And I know we're great this period of Manchester, but there's also a downside as well that some people, not through any fault of their own, just failed to get onto that success story, and what a shame. But like I said, there were some bands that just unfairly didn't make it and should have done. But I think, again, inevitably there was a backlash with anyone from Manchester around about 1991, and even if you were a great band, you were done for. London wanted they wanted payback.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of a lesson of how brutal the media can be, because they will pick you up, but they'll also put you down very quickly as well. And good lesson in life, those years.
Yeah.
You know?
See, when you look at the Ruthless Rap Assassins.
Oh, what I love that band.
I love Black Grape when Kermit comes back. But like you said before, how photogenic was he?
Oh, well, all of I thought the Ruthless Rap Assassins, all of them were. Anderson and Carson were really, really. I love that band. Yet they didn't break through like they should have done. Maybe it was because they didn't fit the white profile of Manchester at that time, which was a shame, because really they were really our answer to Public Enemy, weren't they? Yeah, they were up there as good as Public Enemy. I thought.
Then you had that Quality Street album from
World of Twist.
World of Twist, and later on they seemed to influence Oasis a bit, didn't they?
Yeah, because they covered Sons of the Stage. Liam Gallagher did, didn't they?
Yeah.
You see, for me, being interested in aesthetics and the visual side of things, I love World of Twist. How visual were they?
I love their videos.
And they had crazy ideas as well. You know, when you see them live, the stage and what they do, and they were my favourite band, probably the Manchester band. You know, alongside the Ruthless Rap Assassins, I think World of Twist.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
There's a great picture, very famous picture, 1990 outside Wolverhampton Magistrates
Yes,
Court.
Stone Roses.
You got the Rosie. Did you get a vibe at that stage that the wheels were coming off a wee bit for the Roses?
No, they were at the height of their powers, really. I think we all had a good joke and we all had a good laugh about that court case. But I think it's only in hindsight that bloody court case probably ruined them.
Yeah.
But I remember at the time it was a big joke. But I think, what a shame. I don't know. I don't know what the Stone Roses think. It's not for me to say, is it? But for me personally, I think it ruined everything, really. It stopped them doing a second album. It stopped momentum. They started pissing about in the studio for years on end.
The momentum's massive.
Yeah.
What I love about that picture is the threads, what they're wearing.
I know.
mean, if a band in Manchester starts to influence guys up in Scotland, you know there's a movement.
Yeah. Well, again, lucky I was in the right place at the right time, but it was almost like a band photo session that whole day in court. You know, they were only in court that day for probably 5 minutes at max. So they were all dressed up to kill, as they say. And they looked great. And again, there weren't many people there outside, you know, and I was just lucky, really. You know,
we've spoke a bit about Manchester and the sort of music scene in Manchester. A big name around that time was Tony Wilson.
Yeah.
And I know you also have an interesting story about Tony Wilson that links him to our city.
Yes, of course. So when going back to cities, I've always loved cities, culture. This is why we're here, isn't it? Culture again. And what's lovely with this country is how different cities are to one another. And I've always thought, you know, Manchester, Liverpool and Glasgow have been the real critical cultural cities, certainly from punk onwards. And when you start thinking about cities, you start thinking about record labels and the DIY ethic and the independent scene. And what makes a good city is there's always a bloody good record label behind that city. You know, Manchester, you had Factory, and Liverpool, you had Zoo, and Glasgow, of course, Postcard Records, which I adored as a you know, at school, and as a 15, 16-year-old. Edwyn Collins was my hero, you know. But the start of it all was a guy called Bob Last, who came from Edinburgh. And he ran an independent record label called Fast Product. And that was, I think, in 1977, 78. And Tony Wilson openly admitted he took a lot from looking at what Bob was doing in Edinburgh. And he came up and chatted, and they met. And Factory came from what Bob was doing in Edinburgh. And as I was telling you before, the Factory started in Hume at the Royce Club, which was called the Factory Club, which is then called the PSV Club, which, the Caribbean Club. So again, we're back to Hume and the importance of Hume. So without the Factory Club in Hume, there wouldn't have been a Hacienda years on. We wouldn't have had Joy Division. Now, bizarrely as well, interestingly, Bob Last brought out, I think, Joy Division's first records on vinyl were with Bob Last on Fast Product, which was like a 12-inch thing, Earcom it was called. And it had the Mekons were on it, and I think the Human League were on it early on, and Joy Division were on it. So again, it's a nice thing with Edinburgh, even though I hate to say it, it's always the west. The West is the best.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, why is that? That's another debate for another time. Why is the West? Is it because of Ireland and America? Bad weather? Wetter weather? Who knows? But if you look at the country, it's always the West, isn't it?
It's interesting.
It is interesting.
Another thing you mentioned was the issue around diversity. Why didn't the band make it? Because they're black. Now that's interesting when you look at the makeup of Manchester at the time.
To me, it was the only downside to me at the time. But you see, this is where my upbringing in Birmingham and my history of photographing and what I photographed in certain areas and obviously hanging about in Sparkbrook and Moseley there was a real rich diversity.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting one, the Manchester thing, because was the media to blame? Because I don't think Manchester was to blame, because Manchester's always been diverse and proudly diverse. And we had MC Busby. That's another great one to mention. He should have been massive and wasn't during Manchester. Kiss AMC were great as well during that time. I think the blame lies with the record labels and probably London, and who they were signing and promoting. It's another good debate to have. Also, punk, the good thing with punk, wasn't it, was how it wasn't just a male dominated scene. Manchester could have done with a few more females.
Definitely. Yeah, without a doubt.
It had a few, but not enough.
Mm-hmm.
In hindsight, when we're looking back, who was to blame? I'm not gonna blame Manchester, because Manchester's always been a really diverse city and proudly diverse, and has always supported many scenes. So I'm going to blame the London media. Come on, let's blame London.
Why not?
We'll start off with this.
Yeah, so this is the Birmingham Trades Council Centre for the Unemployed, where they had a dart room. I was telling you about how really that's where I got my education from, really, which school couldn't provide, and I owe them so much, because they encouraged me to take photos and go out in the area. But also, as I said, I'd really learnt about issues when I was there, and I guess I grew up there.
Brilliant. It seems that it's
vital place, and obviously these places probably don't exist now.
Yeah, that's
You know.
So then moving on, you've been sent out to take photos. So I suppose this will be you starting to take pictures.
You see, I give you this one because this is a special photo for me, because this was probably the first music band I photographed. Just Justin and Benny, who were from the band called Godflesh, who were quite a really big underground band. Now, Justin actually helped form Napalm Death. I happened to be living in the same house as them. Again, luck, pure luck. But I did a whole series of sessions with them. They were so photogenic, and the area we chose to do them in, again, was this Sparkbrook area, and it just suited what they were after and what I was after, and it was just a good combination. But in some ways that it means a lot to me, that photo, because it was like the start of the journey, really. And yet it was with Godflesh, who were that superb underground cultish band, even to this day now. And you know, sorry, what's funny? So when I went on Instagram, I put this photo up, and Benny got in touch. The next day, I had all these massive Instagram followers with like weird names. Church Rot in Hell, and you know, well, I can't repeat a lot of them. Yeah, it again made me laugh. That, but lovely people, Justin and Benna, you know. But a great way to start up photographing, and means a lot to me, that image.
Yeah, brilliant.
This also means a lot because this was very early on. Now, you've got to remember, I was probably only about 19, 20 at this point, and you know what it's like at that age. You're lacking in confidence, and this was a result of the Centre for the Unemployed kicking me out into the local community and saying, don't come back until you've done a whole series of photographs. So it actually gave me the courage to pluck up. I didn't know these two. And I went up to them and said, can I take your photo? And what's nice is the majority of people who I did that with said, yes, of course. It's only in later life, look how they both sat with their arms on their knees. I couldn't have posed that even better, you know. So that's a special photo for me in many ways, in the fact it was one of my early photos. But also it gave me a lot of courage to start thinking differently about approaching the public and having confidence. So I love that photo. Love that photo now. Means a lot. Again, means a lot.
And we've got one more from your Birmingham collection.
This is fascinating because it probably didn't mean anything at the time because it's an everyday surrounding and you're used to that, but Christ, 30 years on, Birmingham doesn't look like that anymore. And that's the power of photography, how we capture things and we record things and document things, because things don't stay the same. That's another lesson for me now. But I again, wow, I don't remember Birmingham looking that brutal. So I love the fact as well that there's hardly any cars on the road as well. So that would have been about 1986, I think, in Birmingham. Power of photography, isn't it? How it captures time and we forget things and really it's another lesson for me quite early on about how photography, how as a tool, it's a great way to document things. And same with a couple of years later with Hume. You see, it's all gone. If I hadn't have done them photos, you forget what things look like.
Mm-hmm. Where is it documented?
You know.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, leads on to why people archive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how it's important to keep a record of things, because in the day-to-day, nothing changes, but over time, you'd be amazed. 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years, everything looks different.
Yeah. Now, you spoke about coming into our studio
I
and
loved
seeing
it.
You loved it. You saw everything, and
Yeah.
it reminded you so much. Now, there's another wee funny connection between us that we never really knew about. So we'll move on to this photo.
Ah, yes, Brian McClare. When you got in touch with me, obviously, you know, I hadn't heard of you, State of Mind, and I started looking into what you'd done and who you'd interviewed. And the footballers you'd interviewed were the footballers I'd photographed, which was a great way of knowing you lot up here were tuned in right. And you'd done Pat Nevin, a wonderful interview with Pat Nevin, who I could listen to all day, really. And a lovely interview with Brian McClare as well. Now, both happen to be I think I've only photographed one other footballer, Niall Quinn. So that told me you lot are all right up here. You know what you're doing. It was a nice touch, wasn't it, to find that out, you know.
Yeah. And obviously you've photographed a lot of other famous people and big characters around those times. So if we just take a wee look through some of the photos you've sent as well, we'll start off with.
Well, Steve Coogan, I mean, like I said, I've got so many great memories with Steve because I did all his early characters, and I did a lot of photos for his early comedy shows where he used to project images. And he'd get me photographing various books and school magazines of people that were always odd-looking people. So I knew what his jokes were going to be like. But he was, again, what was lovely with Steve is he would act in character when you do the photos. But I got used to this because most of the people who I was photographing would do that. Frank Sidebottom, for example, was another one, and it would always be in character. So you just, they were good fun. I mean, this isn't like work, is it? This is why I did this. I loved it. I had a passion for photography. It wasn't work. And I think with Steve, it was just great fun hanging around with him. Really, he's a funny bloke. I mean, we all know what's happened since with him, and how he's developed further and come up with loads of other great characters, like the Alan Partridge one. I didn't do that one. As I told you earlier about the Pauline Calf character as well, I'd love to have photographed him in as Pauline. But great memories with Steve, and so thrilled and great seeing the success he's had. Good bloke.
Yeah. Very, very intelligent man.
Caroline Hearn as well. I mean, obviously this is tinged with sadness, isn't it? Because she's left us way too soon. Caroline was lovely as well. So this was Sister Mary Immaculate. And she had two characters at the time. The other one was a country and western singer, Mitzi Goldberg. So this was very early on. And she was only just starting out when I took this photo. So I was the first person probably to photograph Caroline Hearn in character. Wow. And that was round my flat in Hume, as was the Steve Coogan. So that's what's lovely again in that setup in that hideous tiny little squat I had in Hume with no heating. I couldn't use the kitchen cupboards because they were full of things living that I didn't want to know about, and yet all these people come round my place and we did these photos, and that was another one in my living room. That.
So if you just take us through some of the photos from Hume, because we've touched on that a lot, and it's been, I mean, it seems to be the centre of a lot of the stories that come out.
It is. It's very central to my life, really. Even now, even though I don't live there anymore, I stay. I've got friends in Hume, and I'm always staying in Hume when I'm in Manchester. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I'm documenting Hume now, which is the new version of Hume. Yeah. Now, briefly, Hume has had 3 versions, which is unusual for anywhere. I don't know anywhere that's had 3 radically different versions. The terrace streets, the brutalist concrete council estate, the second what I photographed, and then the present day, which is like again more of a modern. I'm not going to say conventional setup because it's still quite weird, Hume. purposely, which is great how they've designed it. But it's nowhere near as extreme as this version. But I still feel I owe Hume a lot, and I still love photographing in Hume to the present day. Right, so these photographs were taken round about 1989 to 1990, and that was the block I lived in, Charles Barry Crescent. What was really great for me at that time was it suited my style of photography, which was black and white, and obviously black and white. There was hardly any colour in Hume anyway. And I think I homed in on the fact that I was young and I wasn't thinking too logically. I guess it's only 30 years on and I'm looking back, I realised there's certain things that I did do and why. But at the time, I probably wasn't thinking too much about too deeply. But it did remind me of Spaghetti Junction in Birmingham a lot, remember, prior to Hume. And also I knew Hume with the factory link and that aesthetic Manchester had in terms of greyness and rain and Joy Division and then a certain ratio, that kind of East European outlook. So that's a great photo to show you because that's the Caribbean. Now that is the start, really. Without that strange looking building next to the Crescent. See, that's Charles Barry Crescent. So that's where I lived, that block. So I was right spitting distance to where factory started. So without that odd looking building, you wouldn't have had the Hacienda. So that really was the start of things with factory. And all those great gigs in 78 with Joy Division and Cabaret Voltaire and Human League, a lot of those bands, those post-punk bands played in that little strange-looking building. This is a love. I've given you this one because this was the cinema. Now, Hume had an alternative cinema. Now, I know cities in the UK now that don't have an alternative cinema. Hume District had its own alternative cinema. And a lot of the great, like I said, I was a real fan of film. And I remember seeing lots of great films there in the 80s, you know, David Lynch films and Betty Blue and all those really good art house films were shown in Hume. Now, I've got two daughters that are grown up in the 20s. I show that photo to, I remember a couple of years back, I showed that photo to them and say, how'd you like the cinema I used to go to? And they'd say, that's not a cinema. I said, it is. He says, no way is that a cinema. That was Hume's style. Again, 30 years on, you look at it, I'm glad I photographed it at the time. Thank God I did. But it's only 30 years on when you look at it. It's beautiful, isn't it? Look at the patterns on it and the shape of it and the shutters. You know, it just... A lot of the photos mean more as the years go on. Mm-hmm. That's one of them. So Streets in the Sky was a wonderful term. And the idea was there were 4 big crescents and they were all linked with these walkways. Now that, again, for a photographer, it's brilliant, isn't it? Because what you want as a photographer is you want to be ground level, yes, but also fantastic opportunities if you go high. Them walkways give you some great opportunities of photographing down. And also, I did a lot of portraits higher up using Hume as the backdrop looking down. So it gives you options. So again, as a photographer, I was in paradise, really. And also, a quick note, look how look at the cars, or how little, or how fewer cars there are. Nobody had cars in Hume. In fact, there were more burnt out cars than there were normal cars.
It's the height of these pathways.
Yeah.
It's pretty frightening when you look.
Well, you know the story I said, why they moved families out. Yeah.
It's a shame. It's a shame because it is such an iconic place.
Mm.
Now we'll just quickly go through our Manchester photos.
So Tony Wilson, quickly was again, obviously, sadly he's not with us, and sometimes you realise just how much we miss these people when they're not around. Now Tony Wilson took a lot of flack over the years in Manchester, his style and how he talked, but actually he invested in Manchester, and really so many, certainly for young people, I've got a lot to thank him for, because he did encourage many people to do things. And I remember when I was there around 1991, Tony Wilson would have a festival called Celebration, and it would actively encourage young people to take part and music and performing arts and poetry and he gave, that encouraged a lot of people to be creative. And obviously the factory story doesn't get any better, does it, than that? The whole history of factory, the madness of it, the poor decision making, yet when you look back, it's far better to do that than be totally business orientated, really, because it was all about being creative, factory. And I think history will look back on that period and will value that far more than if it had been a viable business-minded company, but ultimately quite dull. So I've got a lot of affection for Tony Wilson, and I like that photo of him because it's got the warehouse in the background as well, which is very old Manchester, but also it's got him in quite a reflective pose and quite a powerful pose, and he was a figurehead for Manchester.
So when you spoke about your love of film,
yeah,
you knew Tony Wilson, you know Steve Coogan. How did you react when you watched Steve Coogan playing Tony Wilson in 24
I thought
Hour?
Steve played him fantastically well. Got all the mannerisms right, all the madness right. I thought it was a great film. Done really well. I mean, you worry, don't you? You worry. It's like now, sorry, diverting a bit. There's this new Sex Pistols thing that Danny Boyle's done. I'm terrified of this, of watching it, because I'm not sure it's going to be any good. I've seen a few photos of the cast members, and you think, 24 Hour Party People as a film. It wasn't cringe. There was no cringe moments in that, which is fair play to them, because that's a hell of an achievement. Yeah. Clint Boone, that photo there. Now, I remember this was a Sunday morning, and I always thought fair play for Clint Boone just turning up. I just got in touch with him. Can I take your portrait? Okay, when we're going to do it? How about early one Sunday morning at the back of the Manchester venue called the Boardwalk? And he turned up and did it. For why? So I've always thought, I hope he likes that photo, because to me, again, look at the haircut. We're back to the whole thing about culture and fashion and iconic moments. And I think with Manchester, there's certain... Bez is a character, obviously. Clint Boone and his haircut is another one. And I'm happy with that photograph, because I feel... It's great Clint's still here, but his haircut's nowhere near as good as that haircut there. So these are important things to document. Again, Absolutely. We're talking about documenting a time and a moment, because things don't last. And really, I look at that photo and I think, thank God I got that, because that was at the height of his powers, at the height when he had his great haircut. And I've really always thought... gratitude for him turning up and allowing me to do that.
You spoke about Bez, and I mean, you've got a great picture of him having the time of his life.
Well, again, it's caught him in his prime, isn't it? Look at his eyes. But it's the mouth as well, and the lockjaw. but it's the fingers. I think it's just the light. You know when you've got a good photo. Like I said, I'm not gonna come on here and say I'm wonderful and all my photos are fantastic, because far from it. But sometimes when one or two photos, you think, wow. It's not often I think that, or it's not often you instantly think, caught it. Because I'm never ever happy usually with what I do and what I've photographed. I'm always think I could have done better, or that's not right, or that's bugging me. But there are one or two images where I think, yes, that was one of them. And it's hard to do that because you're reliant on so many. That's why photography is such a passion for me, because it's not easy, and you're very much reliant on lighting, on the person who you're photographing, on your angle, so that many things can go wrong. But it makes it that moment when you do capture something and something you're happy with. There's no better feeling,
That is just a moment in time, that one at Bez, though. That's perfect.
Yeah. Now, this is I give you this one because obviously I'm a huge Joy Division fan, as you probably guessed, and New Order, and the whole concept of Manchester and factory and its history and its aesthetic. And I was telling you earlier about how in a lot of cases I didn't get nervous or shy or but in this case I did slightly. Meeting Hooky was I don't know why, it spooked me a bit, and I didn't let on. I was crazy. I didn't want to let on. I was a huge Joy Division fan, and I was playing it all cool and casual like, and next thing I know, his daughter turns up as well, and I said, are you all right if I take a few photos of the two of you? And he said, yeah, fine, no worries. And I think it's only in later life when I've had obviously I've got two daughters. It's meant more to me in recent years than probably at that time. I didn't use that photo for anything at the time. But it's only now I realise that the beauty of that, and I feel quite privileged that I got that photo, because it's a bit special. You don't often see a photo like that with one of their kids, but it also feels a natural portrait, and nothing's forced, and I love the background on it as well.
Oh, definitely.
So that and obviously with it being Hooky, who I grew up with, from school onwards.
Did you have a feeling after the Kevin Cummins picture had been so influential that it kind of come full circle that you're photographing Hooky?
I've often felt strange about the Kevin Cummins photo, more to do mainly with the Hume photos I've taken. I know that Joy Division photo is a big moment in my life anyway, in terms of how it gave me inspiration, gave me direction. It is spooky, the story of Hume and how it links things, and even how it already involved me even before I was in Manchester, even when I was still living in Birmingham. There was that link. I didn't know it, but it was there. But you know what? Manchester is actually quite a small city. And I think it's very easy to see a lot of the connections with people and places, because it isn't that big, believe it or not. Birmingham's a bigger city. Yet Manchester's so much more going on and smaller. But I think because it was compact and the venues were all closer, and everyone tended to know the same people, it became quite easy to connect. They always say that about London, don't they? Which is why in some ways I'm glad probably I never lived in London, is it's so big and sprawling that it's hard to make friends and connect with people. So I think that was another thing in its favour, Manchester was. It's not actually big, really. It was quite easy to walk around the city and to get to know people, you know.
Richard, as well as covering music, comedy, all the fine arts, you've also done a lot of photography within football. Talk to me a bit more about that.
Yeah, really, I guess 30 years ago, around that time in Manchester, really, there were so many links with football and music and fashion. And there's a massive crossover. And again, you know, I've often spoke about being in the right place at the right time and luck. I got friends with a university lecturer who ran a department at Manchester Polytechnic called Dr. Steve Redhead. And he had written a book the year before called End of Century Party, which was about Acid House and the Hacienda. And again, it had a great photo by Kevin Cummins on the front cover. And I don't know what happened or how we got introduced, but he was a big fan of a guy called Adrian Sherwood, who was owned the On New Sound record label, which is like a dub label. And I loved their stuff, and obviously I became friends with Steve, and it was a useful time for me, really, because I'd finished my 2-year course by this time in Manchester, and I was supposed to go to London for the next 2 years of this course, because it's a 4-year course. I couldn't leave Manchester. I could not leave. It's funny, I'm Christ, I'm so glad I didn't, looking back. Mm-hmm. So I ended up not wanting to go out into the real world. I wanted to stay in Manchester. So I come up with this idea, right, I'm going to forge an NUS card, continue and bluff my way and tell everyone I'm still a student, work in the student union bar at the dinner times, and hang out with Steve Redhead all in the mornings and afternoons. And Steve was happy with this. And it wasn't just me hanging about this office. There was a whole host of Mancunian faces in there. None of them were students. I remember there's a lot of Man United fans in there. Steve come up to me one day and said, I'm going to write this book on football and music and fashion, and I want you to do the photos for us. So, of course, you know, this was perfect. Yes, I'll do it. So that began a year, probably about a year, 18 months of immersing myself in football culture, really. Mainly in the Northwest, obviously, Everton, Liverpool, Man United, Man City and Oldham. And I had a great time with it. And I think the idea was to show how much football had changed in the late 80s, because... Christ, it was grim in the 80s, football, with Thatcher and the Tories hated football, and football fans were herded around. Every stadium had all cages everywhere, and obviously there was Heysel and even in 89 with Hillsborough. What happened, I think, was a lot of working class kids suddenly stopped. Well, I think they changed drugs, didn't they? And certain drugs mellowed people out. And I think this then certainly worked its way in towards going to the football with your mates. All of a sudden became quite a chilled out vibe, a bit like going to the Hacienda on a Friday and a Saturday night. And there was a definite crossover, and you could sense it and feel it. And I think the idea with Steve's book was to capture this new kind of fan, the new football fan. So again, 30 years on, looking back on it, I'm glad in a way I caught this, because not only the photos I took were just before the Premier League started in 92. So it was a great document of where football was around 1991. And of course, we all remember the World Cup in Italy and how wonderful that was. So there was a good feel vibe to being a football fan, and all of a sudden it was quite fashionable as well. And I guess I was lucky that it coincided with Steve doing the book, and years on, my photos have been quite successful in terms of Cafe Royal Books have published them, and also I did a book at the time with Steve. This is the book called Football with Attitude. So that came out in 1991, even though I hated the cover, by the way. And this is a lesson. I had many arguments with the publishers over that cover, and I let them win in the end and do what they wanted. But I regret it to this day. So, like I said, a lot of the photos were based in the Northwest, and it was obviously the main big four: the Liverpool, Everton, Man City, Man United. When I look back, though, I think it's the Liverpool photos, the Merseyside photos, I really enjoy the most now. So this one here is the Junior Evertonians. You know what? I realise now, because there weren't many photographers in those days. There was no mobile phones, remember? So no one was photographing on mobile phones. Young kids really didn't really give a monkeys what I was doing in some ways, and to a certain extent they're acting up a little bit on this, but not really. And I think don't think you could get this today, because everyone's so conscious of image and media and online film, videos, photographs, mobile phones. So I think. It was a good time to do a project like this, and especially, as I said, it was just before the Premier League. So this was before the pricing all went up, the stadiums got done up. I guess, dare I say, was it still slightly more working class back in 91? Do we still see a lot of young kids going to football now like that? You know, I'm not sure we do. Would they be able to afford to? I don't know. Not at the big clubs anyway. So again, this one was at Liverpool. Look at what I love with this is a real mix of people, isn't there? Young, a bit slightly older. It just seems... It's 30 years ago, but it feels longer than 30 years ago. It's almost like as if that was taken from the 1960s even, you know. Again, I love the fact that people are a little bit unsure. What's he doing? I think people are so not used to having cameras pointed at them in those days. That one I love. That's one of my favourites, really, in the sense that no one's really too much paying much attention to what I'm doing. And I think as a photographer, what you really ideally want to be is invisible in street scenes. And as I said, you know, I've got to know many famous photographers over the years, study their work and what they do, and all the really great street photographers. It's almost as if people don't know they're there. That one, I love the angles of the faces and the boy in the foreground looking back and the girl with the blonde hair. I don't know. Again, you know, I was talking to you about the Bez photo where you know instantly it's a good photo. I think with that one as well, I knew straight away, oh, I like this one. And like I said, a lot of what you photograph is rubbish or doesn't turn out how you want it. But it's just that moment when you realise you've caught something is special. And I've always loved that photo. And that's another indicator when you know what's a good photo, when you've kept with it for 30 odd years and you still like it, you know? Oh, I love this one. Now, this is a great story because this was from a Man City fanzine. Now, we all love football, and we all love the banter of football and the different cultures, and especially in divided cities. I feel sorry for some cities that only have one team because they're missing out. So Manchester, you've got this incredible rivalry with City and United. And remember, 30 years ago, it was all Man United. Yet all the hip kids, some people are going to hate this, all the hip kids supported Man City. And I used to, all my mates were Man City fans, so I would go to Man City, really. I mean, terrible to admit that. Obviously, I had to pretend I was neutral, you know. And obviously, let me point out, I'm a Wolves fan, by the way. But when living in Manchester during that time, if I did go to the football, which I did enjoy going, it would inevitably be to Man City. So Man City seemed to be a little bit more forward with the fanzines and the music and the fashion. And they had a number of great fanzines, and one of them I think was called Blueprint. And the guy rung me up and said, I've got this idea. We've got this new T-shirt with Colin Bell on, but we want to do it with like the Smiths photo at the Queen is Dead album outside Salford Lads Club. So he got these 4 people, and we had the album, the Smiths album, in front of us, and we had to try and match it up, which is very difficult to do. I've done it a number of times over the years where you're trying to either recreate a photo I took 30 years ago in a modern day context, or you're trying to recreate a famous photograph with other people coming in. I actually feel with this, I did a bloody good job. And I just loved the story of it, the concept of the City having a pop at United. And I always rooted for the underdog, and back then, remember, City were the underdogs in Manchester. Now this was the time when I went to Rotterdam for the week to photograph the Cup Winners' Cup final, May 1991, with Man United v Barcelona. And again, Steve Redhead at the Polytechnic set up this for about 5 of us to go over. Paid for the accommodation, paid for the ticket, go along, but photograph stuff. Okay, I'll do that. That's not a hardship. This was in Amsterdam, I think the day after the final. And we were walking along, and I saw all these lads, and of course one of them had a Hacienda t-shirt on and Naf top on, and it was just perfect, wasn't it? So luckily they were outside the Cannabis Connoisseurs Club, which, listen, that's a gift. As a photographer, that's a gift. That's like walking along and you've struck gold. And if you can't get a good photo of that, then there's something wrong with you. So again, it's a lovely story with this photo, because a couple of these people, we recreated this about 2 years ago under the Mancunian way. 4 of them people in that photo. Man United fanzines have often used this photo over the years. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Fair play to them. That's fanzine writers, isn't it? And both City and Man United are great have really good people running the fanzines. They wanted to recreate this photo, and of course I said, I'd love to do it, you know, and we did it, and I met the 4 of them, and we've often talked about that day and what they recall and what I recall. And again, that's the beauty of photography, what photography has given me over the years, these wonderful stories and moments, and recreating that was a really nice touch, and I did enjoy meeting those lads 30 years on.
It's incredible. I was going to actually ask you if any of these people from the street shots had ever been in touch with you. So
a few of them have been, yes. I even had one recently. Where am I? Manchester. This is a mind-blowing one. I did a book launch for this in Manchester. What was it, about a month ago? The first person, the first person to walk in the shop was this girl here, and I didn't know her, and she introduced herself. You've took my photo. I'm in that book. I said, you're joking? She says, yeah. Ellen Road, Happy Mondays gig, 1991, and she's 50 now. Wow. And I had a lovely chat with her, and again we spoke about what do you remember, and you know, why did you agree to having your photo taken, and it's things like that. It's lovely, you know, and it happens quite a bit where. There was an Oldham fan as well, got in touch. The mother got in touch and said, that is my daughter. And then a daughter got in. So there's lovely little things where years on, 30 years on, and it's lovely meeting people that you photographed who I didn't know anyway, but, you know, and then talking to them. It's, yeah, a lovely moment.
Special.
Yeah. Well, this was the cover, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They used this for the Cafe Royal book cover. Again, great. Craig, who runs Cafe Royal Books, has got a habit of picking really good covers, because I don't really have a say in any of these books in terms of how they're edited. I give him a batch of photos and he does the version and he sends it to me, and in all cases I've been happy with what he's chosen and how he's who's on front cover, who's on back cover, who's centre page. So he used that image as his front cover, and I think again it's a classic haircut. It's Sean Ryder haircut, isn't it? And again, I think it emphasises the links with football and music back then. So I could understand why he used that on the front cover, and I'm happy he did do that, because it's got the baggy element, it's got the haircut. It's got young people, football supporters. Yeah. So, again, if you're wanting to link what we do, football, music, fashion, I suppose that photo says it, doesn't it?
Captures a whole lot.
Yeah.
I know somebody that had a haircut just like that, actually.
Of course I did. It was the 90s.
It was the Sean Ryder.
It was the 90s.
Sean Ryder, of course, famously introduced that haircut to the world.
See, just talking about the Cafe Royal books, do you think you could give us a bit more detail on that and how you actually came to doing them?
I mean, really, my story has only really came to prominence really in the last probably 4 or 5 years with the British Culture Archive, and they got in touch about the Hume photographs, and from that the British Culture Archive did a interview with me, and Craig at Cafe Royal saw the interview and saw some of the photos and said, I really like those, can you send me any more you've got? So I sent him a few more, and within a matter of a couple of months, this is what came out, and this was the first Cafe Royal book I had. And I remember sitting at home when it came through the letterbox, and I had no idea what to expect. It was a very exciting moment, but also I was extremely nervous. And I remember it took me a while to open up this packaging, because I was so worried about I was going to be disappointed, and you know, I think past history has told me with certain things I've had published, I'd always end up disappointed. It wouldn't come over how I wanted it, or it wouldn't look right, or it would be cropped badly. And so anyway, I opened up, and instantly I thought, oh my God, he's caught Hume. He's done it superbly. The print quality, the black and whiteness of it, the high contrast, the black nature inside of it, the brutal nature of it. He caught it, and I was so taken aback, because I was so expecting to be. I'm never happy. I'm a Brummie. Brummies are never happy. Yet I knew straight away, wow, Craig. And obviously I started delving into what he was doing at Cafe Royal by now and looking at all the great photographers and all the wonderful little books he's had out, because they're so cheap as well. And in some ways it's a perfect DIY punk rock setup. So it's right up my street, really. And obviously I've now had 5 books out in the last few years, so I'm got so much thanks for what Craig's doing and for how he's promoted my work. And it's a really, he's done wonders for me, really. There's hopefully going to be a few more books to come. I certainly want a Berlin Wall photos, which I think it will be a great move for me anyway, away from football, music, portraits. The British Culture Archive was another great setup for me as well now, where they sell a lot of my photos online. The Carolina Hearn one is the one that's sold the most. So it's been really good for me in the last 4 or 5 years. In some ways, I've it's a new lease of life for me, really. And although the passion for photography has never gone away in that 40 years, it's so. As creative people, you have cycles, don't we? We certainly for me anyway. I tend to go in cycles where I'm really quite motivated and inspired, and I will 100% do things and do it quite manically. And then there's times when I'll not do anything, whether that almost like a writer's block, isn't it? I know I'm riding another really creative wave at the moment. And it's a really positive thing. And with that, the new photos I'm doing, because obviously I'm still taking lots of photographs to this day. So there's many projects I've got on the go. But also I've got really more involved in talking about photography, which I love, which is, you see, I didn't do any of that lecturing or talking 30 years back. Whereas now I've done quite a bit at libraries and universities, Manchester University, Salford University, and I've also done a few things online where I've spoke about photographing in, say, Morecambe, or photographing in Manchester, or so. It's been I'm in a good moment. Okay, so hopefully my next Cafe Royal book will be based on my Berlin Wall photos, which I was so lucky to get an opportunity to go over at the end of 1989, New Year 1990. I had a good friend from the Birmingham days and said, look, I've got accommodation, do you fancy coming over? So I went over, I think for about 5 days, and it was just, I obviously took my camera, and I shot about 3 rolls of film, I think. But again, I wish I'd took more, because again, what you got to realise is digital now. We can take so many photos these days and just delete if you don't want. But in those days, you were very much restricted with film and either 24 exposure or 36 exposures, and again, money. So obviously, I think I did about 3 or 4 rolls of film, and wow. It was really, again, how important photography is to capture things and capture, I suppose in this case, historical. So the Berlin Wall had come down in November 89. So this was about 6 weeks after the wall came down. What makes me laugh is when I first got there, I thought, oh my God, this is like Hume. This wouldn't be out of place. There's a burnt out car. There's everything was there was no colour. Everything was grey again. these are photos that, again, over the years have meant more to me. I realised just what a crazy setup Berlin was, wasn't it, in those days? And again, all gone. I have been to Berlin a number of times over the years, and it's just different, isn't it? It's strange walking around certain places. You know what used to look like, and it's different. There's an office block there now. You know, it's weird. All glass buildings everywhere.
Yeah.
So though, again, like Hume, it's made for a photographer, isn't it? Made for black and white as well. I realised what a black and white world I was living in 30 years ago. I really was. And I wonder psychologically whether that's damaged me. But special photos, Berlin. And Berlin, I love travelling anyway, you know, even to this day. And certainly city breaks is one of the things I love doing. Berlin, Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, Budapest, Prague, all these places I love going to. And Berlin's special, though. The history of Berlin. Stunning place. This was lovely because, again, this combines my love of portraiture and using great places as backdrops. But you can't get me away from portraiture. I love it. And I think it, again, when I first started photography, Diane Arbus was a big influence on me, and her portraits, even to this day, are still up here in my head, influencing how I'm looking and approaching things. What I love with this one as well is how the three people, again, you know, I told you before with photography, there's lots of things can go wrong with photography, and you're reliant on things. In this case, the three people who are photographed look fantastic. And I think this is what you're trying to do in portraiture. You've got to try and make that person look fantastic. And it's not easy to do that because of everyone's very conscious of a camera. That's really the skill and technique, really, with portraiture, is to make that person who you're photographing feel special and look good. And I love that. I love that photograph. Just because of the way the three of them are acting and the shapes, the backdrop as well, and the strong way they're carrying themselves. It's important with portraiture that, you know. Again, that's quite. There's a lot of emotion in Berlin. And obviously we're all aware that it's history. And I remember I loved the time. Whenever I go to Berlin, like I said, I've been many a times, it always touches you. But it's a powerful place. And even now when I look at the images, God, you think what's gone on there. And crosses and also in a contemporary, what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, and how those, is it Bucha, how is that going to go forward? That's been forever changed, the history of that place, the present, the future of that place. These are the things you think about, really, in terms of when you go to these places and you do these photographs. You're so aware of history and what's gone on before. It's different. It's I look at the Berlin Wall stuff sometimes. It's powerful. It's a powerful place, Berlin, and whether I've done it justice, I don't know. But yeah, I look at that photo and. You know, you look at the now that appeals to my really a lot of my work with photos, like the housing and the architecture. It's all about patterns, isn't it? And extreme patterns and texture and the colour. When I say colour, you're talking about shades here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important, the context of light and dark. Now, the Berlin Wall is a great thing to photograph because look at it, the texture on it. But we also, again, like you said, with you know the history of it and the reason why they built it. You know, it's just crazy and still hard to imagine the effort they went into splitting that city in two. Crazy. But stuff like that, I love that photo just because what it is, obviously, but also it's going down my road of patterns and what I love with a lot of my work, where I know in my head what I'm good at doing in terms of photography, and most of it is pattern making, abstract pattern making as much as possible. That's that's why I gave you that photo. This one. It's how the two people are on that photo got me. They're dwarfed by this. You know, I was talking about the Kevin Cummins environment of the snowy bridge in Hume, and we're creating landscapes, aren't we? And I think sometimes a lot of my photographs involve tiny people in these vast, brutalist environments. And you don't get more brutal than the Berlin Wall at that time. And again, look at the windows, the patterns of the windows. I love the angles of that photo. I love it's on a corner as well. But the two people in it make it for me. Mm-hmm. I think it just shows what a brutal existence that Berlin Wall was, and how can you divide a city in two?
Richard, when we were first in touch and organising this, you told me that you felt Manchester, Liverpool and Glasgow were the best cities culturally. Tell me your experiences of Glasgow. Oh,
right. Well, obviously the music scene in Glasgow. I mean, certainly some of my favourite bands have come from Glasgow. Like I said before, Postcard Records, Orange Juice, and obviously Aztec Camera, but also, you know, things like Jesus and Mary Chain, and there's another one, Claire Grogan, Altered Images, Gregory's Girl. There's a film, a great, one of my favourite films. I think that was right early 80s when I was still at school. It was everybody had a crush on Claire Grogan. Myself included, of course. And of course, then up to current day, you've got Teenage Fan Club, who I think come out of Bells Hill. One of my best friends in Morecambe is from Bells Hill. And I was worried when I first come up here, thinking, am I going to understand them? Because even though I've got this really good friend, sometimes I can't understand the words she's saying. I really can't. But you guys, yes, I can understand you, lot. So, obviously Primal Scream, Bobby Gillespie. I just recently read Tenement Kid. Mm-hmm. What a great book. And of course, he's a big Celtic fan. Also, one of my favourite bands musically, which I've not touched on, was the Cocteau Twins. There were probably 3 or 4 big bands for me in the 80s, and the Cocteau Twins I'd put near the top, really. They were really... I think they were from Grangemouth.
That's right, yeah.
So Glasgow I've always liked, and obviously politically, how is it? You Scots always seem to know what you're doing in terms of politics, and we further down south are so unfortunately caught up in all the awful years we've had under Tory government, you know, from Thatcher obviously, but to the absolute nightmare we have currently under Johnson, which I would say actually is worse than Thatcher, which is saying something. So I've got a lot of love for Scotland. I certainly have, and also, I don't need much encouragement to come up to Scotland. Really, I love the place and the people and the politics and the culture really. And in fact, one of the stories from when I went to Manchester Poly, one of the first outings that we did as a group from the students, we got an overnight sleeper train from Preston. They did these. It's like £10, and you could go all the way up to Fort William. But we did it in February when it was snow. We got stranded north of Glasgow. It was right in the middle of the country in the Highlands. But I didn't realise there's absolutely no built-up cities from Glasgow north. It's that up to the Fort William. It was wilderness, and I always remember you couldn't tell land and sky. White, complete whitewash. Wonderful experience. Actually, Glasgow as well, one of my favourite photographers or favourite photography book in recent times. About 5 years ago, I came across a book called Glasgow by Raymond Depardon, and his use of colour, it's so influenced what I'm doing in the current day, because obviously I shoot on digital as well as film these days, which gives me the option of colour and black and white. And Raymond's photos of Glasgow really influenced how I approach colour photography. It's almost like a subtleness to them. Let me see if I've got an example. Yeah. So there's this photo here. Can the camera see them? So almost like a black and white image, but with just a hint of colour, but extreme bright colour. And I guess I've tried, obviously in my own way, when I've shot a lot of new stuff recently, certainly done a lot of photos underneath Mancunian Way, where I've really tried to minimise colour, but incorporate one really and really pump it up to its maximum as much as possible, and really that's nicked from that Glasgow book. But this is what I'm doing at the moment really. My latest project is a series of portraits under Mancunian Way, and the idea was it was my answer to Brexit really, and I'm really, I can't believe we've got Brexit at the moment, and the madness of it and the pointlessness of it, and really the kind of like movement and mood in England at the moment, where to Tories especially are trying to hark back to like a 1950s or like an empire. And we've always been quite a diverse country and celebrated that fact, the UK. And I've always felt European as well. I've never felt English. I've always felt European. And all of a sudden, the idea that I've got to scrap my passport and have a new passport which doesn't have anything to do with Europe on it appalls me. So what could I do as a photographer? And the idea was to create a whole series of portraits of people using Mancunian Way as a backdrop, to celebrate the diversity of Mancunians. So that's what I'm currently working on, and they've tended to be digital and they've tended to be colour. But I've also tried to make sure I've kept the greyness of the Mancunian Way. So that's what I'm currently working on. But really, yeah, I felt I needed to say and do something about Brexit. I'm sure a lot of us feel this way, because it's like an out of control train, isn't it? We know we're heading for a crash. Brexit doesn't work. Yet people don't want to turn back. People, rather than put the brakes on, people are saying no, increase the speed. So it's my way of trying to, of do anything we can to say, look, hang on a minute, this is crazy,
when you're doing that in art, one of the early images that I looked at was of Terry Christian, and I've always admired his views on music, but also politics.
Yeah, I've spoke a little bit with Terry recently. I'm hoping to do a new portrait with him, I think one of the main reasons was I wanted to get Terry as a portrait under Mancunian Way, because I feel, you know, he's been so courageous in a way in terms of social media, in terms of highlighting the fact that, you know, Brexit is absolutely pointless. But some of the hate he's received online, it's just incredible. So I've got a lot of love for Terry Christian, and I think what a strong character and individual. And he's definitely someone who I want to re-photograph, because, again, I feel like I owe it, really, and we should be supporting Terry, because Terry's doing a lot in terms of, as you say, pointing out the ridiculous situation that we find ourselves in at the moment politically.
He speaks out and he doesn't buckle when the campaign goes against him, which it inevitably does. So that'd be interesting to see him then and now.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to photographing him, you know. So Terry, if you're watching this, mate, I'm doing it. We're doing it, you know.
Well, Richard, thanks very much for joining us at A State of Mind in the studio. We hope you've enjoyed it. We've definitely got some great information.
I've loved doing it, and like I said, I've it's been a pleasure. We could talk forever, couldn't we? But really, thank you for inviting me up. I've loved the fact we've touched on areas I don't normally touch upon as well in terms of my photography. So I've really enjoyed it. I would come up again. You can have me anytime. I'll come up.